rancher saved two wounded Apache girls the next day. Their father arrived with marriage proposal. The rancher rode slowly along the narrow path that followed the creek, letting his horse choose the easiest steps over stones and dry grass. The late afternoon sun painted the sky in soft orange and gold, and the wind carried the smell of dust, water, and wild plants. His name was Jack Williams, and he had lived alone on this land for many years. The ranch was quiet most days, and he had grown used to the sound of his own thoughts, the creak of his saddle, and the steady breathing of his horse. Jack was not a man who talked much. His life had taught him to listen instead. He listened to the land, to the weather, and to the small signs that told him when something was not right. That day, as he guided his horse near the bend in the creek, he felt a strange stillness in the air. Even the birds seemed quiet. The wind had softened, and the usual buzzing of insects was missing. He stopped his horse and leaned forward, scanning the tall grass and thick bushes along the water. That was when he heard it. At first it was so faint that he thought it was only the wind moving through leaves. Then he heard it again, a soft sound, like a weak call for help. Jack slid down from his horse and tied the reins to a nearby tree. His boots pressed into the dry soil as he moved closer to the sound. He pushed aside branches and stepped carefully, not wanting to scare whoever or whatever was there. His heart beat a little faster, not from fear, but from concern. He had learned that the land could be kind, but it could also be cruel to those who were unprepared. As he moved through the brush, he saw a small shape on the ground, then another. Two girls lay close together, partly hidden by leaves and tall grass. Their clothes were torn, and their faces were pale and tired. One of them opened her eyes when Jack stepped closer, but she did not try to move. Jack knelt beside them, his movements slow and gentle. He could see marks of injury on their arms and legs. Nothing looked dangerous, but they were weak, and it was clear they had been walking for a long time without rest or proper care. Their lips were dry, and their breathing was shallow. "Easy now," Jack said softly, even though he was not sure they understood his words. He reached into his bag and pulled out a small water bottle. He held it near the mouth of the girl who was awake, letting a few drops fall. She swallowed slowly and closed her eyes again. Jack looked around, checking for any sign of danger. The land was quiet, but he knew better than to trust silence alone. After a moment, he made a decision. He could not leave them there. Whatever their story was, they needed help, and he was the only one around to give it. He carefully lifted the first girl into his arms. She was lighter than he expected, her body weak and thin. He carried her back to his horse and settled her gently across the saddle. Then he went back for the second girl, who stirred slightly as he picked her up but did not resist. Once both girls were secure, Jack led the horse slowly back toward his ranch. The ride felt longer than usual, his mind filled with questions. Who were they? How had they ended up alone in this part of the land? He noticed small details as he walked, like the way one girl's hand clutched the fabric of her dress, as if she was holding on to something even in her sleep. When he reached the ranch, the sun was dipping low, and the shadows were growing long. Jack guided the horse into the yard and carefully lifted the girls down. He carried them into his small house, which usually held only the smell of coffee and leather. That evening, it became something else, a place of care. He laid the girls on his bed and fetched clean cloths and a small kit he used when he or his animals got hurt. His hands were steady as he cleaned the marks on their skin. He worked slowly, making sure not to cause more pain. The girls did not wake, but their breathing grew easier as he finished. Jack lit a small lamp and sat on a chair nearby, watching them. The quiet of the night wrapped around the room. Outside, a coyote called in the distance, and the wind brushed against the walls of the house. Jack felt a strange mix of worry and peace. He did not know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew he had done the right thing. Hours later, one of the girls stirred. She opened her eyes and looked around, confusion on her face. When she saw Jack sitting nearby, she tensed for a moment. Jack raised his hand slightly, showing he meant no harm. "You're safe," he said in a calm voice. "You're at my place. You were hurt, so I brought you here." The girl studied him, her dark eyes full of questions. She whispered something in a language Jack did not understand. Then she touched her chest and said, "Taya." Jack nodded. "Jack," he said, touching his own chest. The other girl woke soon after. She looked at Taya, then at Jack. Taya spoke to her softly, and the second girl relaxed a little. She said her name was Zita. Communication was slow and simple. They used gestures and short words. Jack brought them more water and some bread. They ate carefully, like they were not sure if the food was real. Jack stayed near, but he gave them space, letting them feel comfortable. As the night went on, the girls told him small pieces of their story. They had been traveling with their people when something went wrong. They had been separated and lost. They walked for days, hiding and resting when they could. By the time Jack found them, they had no strength left. Jack listened, his face serious. He did not interrupt. He felt a deep respect for their courage. They were young, but they had survived something hard. Something that would have broken many people. When the girls finally fell asleep again, Jack stepped outside. The stars filled the sky, bright and endless. He leaned against the fence and let out a slow breath. He knew that helping them was only the beginning. Their family would be looking for them. Their people would come. The thought did not scare him, but it made him think carefully about what lay ahead. He was just a rancher, a man who worked the land and kept to himself. Now he was part of a story bigger than his quiet life. The next morning, Jack woke early and prepared a simple meal. The smell of coffee and warm bread filled the house. Taya and Zita sat at the small table, their eyes following his movements. They looked stronger than they had the day before, but they were still tired. Jack handed them plates and sat across from them. They ate together in silence, but it was not an uncomfortable one. There was a sense of trust growing, slow and careful. After breakfast, Jack showed them the yard and the animals. The girls smiled when they saw the horses and chickens. Zita reached out to touch a horse's mane, and the animal lowered its head calmly. For a moment, everything felt simple. Just three people standing under a wide sky, sharing a quiet morning. But in the back of Jack's mind, he knew this peace would not last long. Somewhere out there, a father was searching for his daughters, a man who would not stop until he found them. Jack looked toward the distant hills, his eyes narrowed against the rising sun. He did not know how that meeting would go. He only knew that when it happened, his life would change in ways he could not yet imagine. For now, he focused on the present. The girls were safe. The land was calm. And that was enough for one day. The morning air was crisp, with the first light of dawn breaking over the horizon. Jack was already awake, as he had been for many years. The stillness of the morning had always been his time to think and plan, and today was no different. He went about his usual routine, tending to the horses, checking the fences, and making sure the small ranch was in good shape. The chores felt familiar, comforting even. But today there was a slight unease in the air, something Jack couldn't shake off. The girls, Taya and Zita, were still asleep inside the small cabin. He had tried his best to make them feel at home, offering them a warm meal and showing them around the ranch. but there was always that unspoken tension. He couldn't help but wonder about their lives before they ended up here. So far from their people, they had been strong enough to survive whatever had brought them to this point. But Jack sensed there was more to their story, something deeper, something that would come to light in time. As he finished his chores, Jack noticed a figure in the distance. A rider traveling fast across the open plain was heading in his direction. Jack's heart skipped a beat. He recognized the silhouette of a horse and rider, a tall man with the posture of someone who had seen many battles. The wind carried the scent of dust and leather, and Jack's mind raced. It could only be one person, the father of Taya and Zita, Chief Nakai, the man who led the Apache people, the one whose presence commanded respect and fear in equal measure. Jack felt his stomach tighten. He had known this day would come. The moment he took Taya and Zita in, he had been aware that their father would likely come looking for them. What he didn't know was how the meeting would unfold. Would Chief Nakai be angry? Would there be violence? Would he demand the girls be returned immediately? As the rider drew closer, Jack could make out the details more clearly. Chief Nakai wore a long, weathered coat, his face shadowed by the brim of his hat. He was a man used to riding long distances, his movements smooth and controlled. Jack took a deep breath, wiping his hands on his pants before walking towards the gate. The ranch was quiet around him, almost as if the land itself was holding its breath in anticipation. The chief pulled his horse to a halt just outside the gate. Jack stepped forward, not knowing exactly what to say. Chief Nakai dismounted slowly, his dark eyes fixed on Jack. There was no immediate sign of anger, but Jack could tell the man was calculating, assessing him. "Good morning," Jack said, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm Jack Williams. You're looking for your daughters, I presume?" Chief Nakai nodded, his expression unreadable. "Yes, I am." Jack gestured toward the house, where Taya and Zita had emerged from the cabin. They had been inside resting, but the sound of the horse had roused them. The two girls walked slowly towards the gate, their faces uncertain, but their steps firm. They had already said little about their father, and Jack knew they were just as nervous about this meeting as he was. Taya and Zita stopped at a distance from their father, their eyes on the ground, not daring to look directly at him. Jack could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. There was a long pause before the chief spoke again. "You took my daughters in," he said, his voice deep and steady. "You cared for them when no one else would." Jack nodded, unsure of how to respond. "They were in need." Chief Nakai's gaze softened, just slightly. "Not everyone would have helped, and not everyone would have done it the way you did." He paused for a moment, and Jack thought he saw a flicker of something. Was it gratitude or respect?
"It was hard to tell. You did not harm them."
"You did not run from the responsibility. For that, I am grateful." The chief's words were unexpected. Jack had braced himself for anger or blame, but instead, the chief was speaking with a calmness that took him off guard. Taya and Zita, standing quietly by the gate, exchanged looks but remained silent. "I owe you a debt," Chief Nakai continued. "A debt I intend to repay." Jack blinked, still processing the chief's words. "I didn't do it for anything in return." The chief's dark eyes never left Jack. "There is more than one way to repay a debt." Jack frowned, unsure of what the chief was getting at. He didn't have much to offer in return for the girl's safety, and he wasn't looking for any reward. But he couldn't ignore the weight of the situation. Chief Nakai turned slightly, signaling to his horse. A small bundle was tied to the side of the saddle, and the chief untied it before handing it to Jack. It was a beautifully woven blanket, rich with colors and patterns that Jack immediately recognized as part of the Apache tradition. "This is a gift," Chief Nakai said, "a token of my gratitude. You have done what few would have done. You took my daughters in as your own, and that is something I will never forget." Jack hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to do. He reached out slowly, accepting the blanket. "Thank you," he said, his voice filled with genuine appreciation. The gift was more than just a token. It was a sign of respect and honor. The chief then stood tall and turned to face his daughters. He looked at Taya and Zita with a deep, knowing expression, as if he had seen something in them that no one else had. They both stood still, watching their father, but there was something different in their eyes, a sense of relief, perhaps, or hope. "I have come to take them home," Chief Nakai said, his voice carrying the weight of finality. "They are my daughters. It is time they return to the tribe. I will not ask you to give them up, but I will ask you to understand." Jack nodded, his chest tight. He had known this moment was coming, but it still felt like a punch to the gut. The girls had become a part of his life, even in the short time they had been with him. They had shared meals, stories, and moments of laughter. Jack had come to care for them as though they were his own. "I understand," Jack said quietly, his voice steady despite the ache in his heart. "But I want you to know, I did what I thought was right." Chief Nakai gave him a look that seemed to hold an unspoken agreement. "I know, and for that, I will always be grateful." For a moment, the air was thick with emotion. The two girls stepped forward slowly, their faces a mix of uncertainty and hope. They glanced at Jack, as if waiting for something. Perhaps reassurance, perhaps permission. Jack met their gaze and gave them a small, nodding smile. "I'll leave you now," Chief Nakai said, his voice deep with a kind of understanding. "But know this, Jack Williams, your actions will not be forgotten. You've done more than most would have." Jack didn't know what to say. The weight of the chief's words hung in the air. But for the first time, Jack realized that this wasn't about the rancher or the Apache chief. It was about the bond between a father and his daughters, the trust that had been built, and the respect that had been earned. "Goodbye, Jack," Taya said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. Zita nodded quietly beside her. The girls turned to follow their father, who was already making his way back to his horse. Jack watched them go, his heart heavy with both sadness and pride. He had done the right thing, even though it wasn't easy, and he knew deep down that this was just the beginning of something much bigger than he had ever imagined. Jack watched as Chief Nakai led Taya and Zita away from the ranch, his mind racing. The weight of the moment felt heavier than anything he had experienced in his life. He stood still, the gentle wind rustling the trees around him, but all he could focus on was the sight of the Apache girls walking beside their father. The strong bond between them was clear. Though they had been separated for some time, it was evident that they were finally going home, to the place they belonged. Taya and Zita didn't look back, but Jack caught the briefest glances between them and the chief as they walked away. It seemed to Jack as though they were leaving behind a part of themselves, something they had found here at his ranch. But he also understood that it was time for them to go, and as much as it hurt, he knew this was their destiny, to return to their people, to their tribe. As they disappeared into the distance, Jack turned back toward the ranch. His home felt quieter now, emptier in a way he had never imagined. The animals, the land, the breeze, everything seemed the same, but something had changed inside him. For the first time in years, he felt like he had made a real difference in someone's life. And yet, he couldn't shake the feeling of loss, of knowing that the girls who had briefly shared his life were now on their way back to the world he didn't fully understand. Jack moved slowly, his footsteps heavy on the dry ground as he walked toward the cabin. He reached for the door, but before he could open it, he paused. The cabin seemed so much smaller now without their presence. For a few short days he had shared his home with two girls who had, despite the hardship they faced, brought light to his quiet world. They had talked about their past, about their families, and Jack had listened, quietly understanding that their lives were so much more complicated than his own. Inside, Jack sat down at the small table where Taya and Zita had eaten their meals. The chair was still warm, the faint smell of food lingered in the air, and for a moment he allowed himself to feel that fleeting connection to them. He could still hear Zita's soft laughter and see Taya's quiet but brave gaze. They were strong, those girls. They had faced challenges Jack couldn't even imagine, and now they were going back to face even more. The weight of the blanket Chief Nakai had given him still sat on the table, a token of gratitude and respect. Jack ran his fingers over the soft fabric, the intricate patterns reminding him of the culture the Apache people held so dear. He had never understood their way of life fully, but he had learned something in those few days. The Apache were a proud people, fiercely loyal to their families and their land. They had their own customs, their own values, and Jack had come to respect them. As he sat there, lost in thought, a sound broke through the silence, a horse's hooves, slow and steady, echoing in the distance. Jack stood up quickly, walking to the window. His heart skipped a beat. A lone rider was coming down the path, moving deliberately and with purpose. Jack knew it wasn't Chief Nakai returning, but someone else. He stepped outside, shielding his eyes from the sun to see more clearly. The rider was wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a long coat, but there was something familiar about the way they moved. As the figure drew closer, Jack recognized him. It was one of the neighboring ranchers, Tom, who lived a few miles down the road. Jack wasn't sure why Tom would be coming by, especially not after what had just happened with Chief Nakai and the girls. Tom pulled up beside Jack, his horse stomping the ground as he dismounted. "Jack," Tom said with a nod, "I thought I'd find you here. I heard about what happened with the Apache girls." "Chief Nakai didn't waste any time, did he?" Jack sighed, looking away for a moment. "No, he didn't. But it was their time to go. They needed to be with their people. I did what I could for them, but in the end, they belong with their family." Tom studied Jack for a moment, then looked toward the horizon where the chief and his daughters had disappeared. "I've got to admit, I didn't think anyone around here would help them, especially not after everything that's been going on with the Apache and the settlers." Jack nodded, understanding the tension that had been growing between the two groups for years. It wasn't easy, but it was the right thing to do. No matter the trouble, they were just girls in need. They didn't deserve to suffer. Tom was quiet for a moment. He had always respected Jack, but there was something about this situation that made him uneasy. "I can't say I'd have done the same, but I reckon you've got something that's hard to find these days, Honor. You didn't think about the danger, about what could happen. You just did what was right." Jack didn't respond immediately. He wasn't looking for praise. He didn't want to be seen as some kind of hero. He just wanted to know that he had done the right thing, that his choices had made a difference. Tom broke the silence. "You think they'll be okay?" "The girls, I mean. You reckon Chief Nakai will protect them?"
"I hope so," Jack said, his voice quiet but firm.
"I've seen enough of their strength to know that they'll be fine. They've got each other, and they've got their father." Tom gave Jack a long look before nodding. I hope so too. You did a good thing here, Jack. Not many people would have taken that risk. Not many would have cared. Jack didn't answer right away. He stood there, watching Tom mount his horse again, feeling the quiet weight of the world on his shoulders. The ranch was still the same. The land stretched endlessly before him. But there was a new kind of silence hanging in the air. It was as if the world itself had paused, waiting for something to happen next. As Tom rode off, Jack went back inside the cabin, closing the door softly behind him. The house felt even emptier now. There was no laughter, no small conversations, no stories being shared, just the soft sound of the wind and the distant calls of the animals outside. Jack took a deep breath and looked out the window, his mind filled with thoughts of Taya and Zita. He wondered what their lives would be like now, how they would grow and change. They were far away now, but Jack felt a connection to them, a bond forged through simple acts of kindness and understanding. They would always be a part of him, and he would never forget the way they had entered his life, even if it had only been for a short time. The day stretched on, but Jack knew that things were changing. The girls were gone, but their impact remained, like a mark on the earth, something that couldn't be erased. Jack understood that. Sometimes, doing the right thing meant letting go of what you wanted for the sake of something greater. And though it hurt to watch them leave, Jack knew he had done what he was meant to do. Days passed, and Jack found himself alone again on the ranch. The usual sounds of his life, the creak of the barn doors, the rustling of the wind through the trees, seemed quieter now. The empty cabin felt like it echoed with memories of Taya and Zita, the laughter they shared, the quiet moments at the table. They had brought a kind of life to the place, a feeling of connection that Jack hadn't realized was missing. The horses still needed tending, the cattle still had to be rounded up, and the fields still needed planting. But Jack did all of this with a new awareness. The land was still his, the ranch still his to care for, but something inside him had shifted. He couldn't deny it. He had done the right thing by helping those girls, and yet there was a lingering feeling, a sense of longing that he couldn't quite explain. He spent the days working as he always had, but his mind would wander back to the brief time he had spent with Taya and Zita. He had learned so much from them in such a short period, about resilience, about survival, and about the strength of family. These were things Jack had never given much thought to before. He had always been content to work alone, to keep to himself and his routine. But now, the thought of connection, of family, felt important. He could see how those girls had clung to each other, how their bond had kept them going, even in the hardest of times. And he wondered if he had ever truly understood what that kind of bond felt like. It was early one morning when Jack was out in the fields, checking the fences, that he heard something. It was the sound of hooves in the distance, steady and rhythmic. Jack paused, looking up toward the horizon. The figure of a rider was visible, slowly coming toward him. Jack's heart skipped a beat. He had hoped this day wouldn't come, but he knew it was only a matter of time. The rider came closer, and Jack could now see that it was Chief Nakai. The chief's horse moved with a steady grace, and his face was as calm and unreadable as it had been the first time Jack had met him. The wind ruffled the chief's long coat as he pulled up beside Jack. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air was thick with the kind of silence that only existed between two men who understood the weight of the situation. "I thought I'd find you here," Chief Nakai said finally, his voice low but steady. There was no anger in his words, no demand or expectation, just the quiet assurance that Jack knew exactly what was about to happen. Jack gave him a nod, his throat tight. I'm here. What brings you back? I've come for my daughters, the chief said. His words were simple, but there was a depth to them that Jack could feel. Chief Nakai wasn't asking for the girls. He wasn't demanding anything. He was speaking as a father, someone who had already made the difficult decision to leave his daughters in Jack's care, and now he had come to bring them back home. Jack's heart ached at the thought. He had known this moment would come. He had known that, no matter how much he had come to care for Taya and Zita, they belonged with their father, with their people. They needed to be with their tribe, where they could be safe and where they could grow into the women they were meant to be. But that didn't make letting them go any easier. Are they well? Chief Nakai asked, his gaze softening just a little. He seemed to be genuinely asking, concerned about the girls' well-being. They're stronger now, Jack replied. It took some time, but they healed. I did what I could. They've been through a lot. The chief nodded, understanding the unspoken meaning in Jack's words. He knew that the girls had suffered, but Jack had done more than just heal their physical wounds. He had given them something they hadn't had in a long time: care, attention, and safety. That was something Jack didn't have to say aloud. The chief understood it in the way Jack had cared for his daughters without hesitation, without asking for anything in return. I owe you a debt, Chief Nakai said, his voice solemn, for your kindness, for your protection. You have done what few would have dared. Jack shook his head, not wanting to be praised. I didn't do it for anything in return. I just did what was right. I know, the chief replied. But that is not a small thing. You have given my daughters more than you know. You gave them a chance when they had none. There was a long pause between them, both men feeling the weight of the words. Jack looked at Chief Nakai, seeing the respect in his eyes. It wasn't the kind of respect that came from fear or obligation. It was the respect earned through shared understanding. They had both done something that was hard, something that required strength, courage, and sacrifice. I cannot ask for anything more, Chief Nakai continued, but I will offer you something in return, as a token of my gratitude. Jack raised an eyebrow. I didn't help them for any reward. The chief smiled slightly, a rare gesture. I know, but it is the way of my people to honor those who help us. Please, accept this. The chief reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a bundle wrapped in cloth. He handed it to Jack, and Jack took it carefully. When he unwrapped it, he found a beautiful piece of craftsmanship, an intricately carved wooden staff, decorated with symbols Jack recognized from the Apache traditions. It was more than just a staff. It was a symbol of respect, of honor, and of connection between the two men. Jack looked at the staff, his fingers running over the smooth wood, the carvings that told a story older than either of them. He couldn't help but feel the weight of the gesture. This was more than just a gift. It was a sign of friendship, of trust, and of shared humanity. Jack felt a deep sense of gratitude, even though he didn't feel worthy of such a gift. I accept, Jack said quietly. Thank you. The chief nodded, his expression serious. You will always have my respect, Jack Williams, and my gratitude. My daughters will never forget the kindness you showed them. With that, Chief Nakai turned to leave. Jack watched him for a moment before walking slowly back to the cabin. The chief's words echoed in his mind. He would always have his respect. Jack had never thought much about respect before. He had always believed that his actions spoke for themselves. But now, he realized that respect wasn't something you earned just by doing what was right. It was something deeper, something that came from understanding, from shared experiences, and from caring for those who needed it the most. When Jack entered the cabin, It felt strangely empty. The girls were gone, but the memories they had left behind were still strong. The sound of their laughter, the way they looked at him with trust and gratitude, it all lingered, even in the silence. Jack knew that their time together had been brief, but it had changed him. It had opened his eyes to the importance of connection, of family, and of caring for others, no matter where they came from. He looked at the staff in his hands once more and smiled, knowing that, in some small way, he had made a difference, and in the end, that was all anyone could hope for. The days that followed were heavy with silence, but it was a quiet Jack had grown accustomed to. It felt like everything on the ranch had slowed down since the girls left, like the land itself had taken a deep breath and was waiting for something. But what was that something? Jack wasn't sure. All he knew was that the space they had filled in his life, with their voices and their presence, was now an empty room in his heart. The animals still needed feeding, the crops still needed tending, and the fences still needed mending. Life on the ranch had not changed, at least not on the surface. Jack's daily routine didn't shift, but he noticed how much longer the mornings seemed to stretch, how much quieter the nights had become. He found himself glancing out at the open land, wondering where Taya and Zeta were, what their lives would be like now that they were back with their people. He thought of Chief Nakai's visit, the way the chief had spoken to him with respect, with quiet understanding. The gesture of the staff was one Jack hadn't expected, but it had meant more than he could say. It was a sign that the chief, despite his stoic nature, saw Jack for who he was, a man who had done something not for reward, but simply because it was the right thing to do. That had meant something, especially in a world that so often saw people as little more than their duties or their work. Jack found himself holding the carved staff often in the days that followed, running his fingers over the smooth wood, feeling the intricate patterns carved into its length. It was more than just a gift, it was a connection, a bridge between two men who had, in their own way, crossed a divide. Jack had learned something valuable during his brief time with Taya and Zeta. He had learned about resilience, about the strength that came from family, and the sacrifices people made for those they loved. But Jack didn't talk about it. He didn't need to. He wasn't the kind of man to share his thoughts with others. Instead, he worked. He worked harder than ever, losing himself in the steady rhythm of his chores. There was something peaceful about it, the way the world seemed to slow down when he focused on the land, the animals, and the tasks in front of him. It helped clear his mind, gave him something solid to hold on to when the emptiness felt too big. Still, there were moments, small, fleeting moments, when his mind would wander back to the girls. He'd remember the way they had looked at him with gratitude, the way they had trusted him without question, despite their circumstances. He hadn't asked for their trust, but somehow it had been given, and he had come to realize that it was a gift far more valuable than anything he could have ever received in return. Jack often found himself standing near the barn door, looking out over the land. The wind would rustle through the tall grass, the sun would rise over the hills, and for a brief second he'd imagine Taya and Zeta out there somewhere, walking along the same earth, breathing the same air. They were far away now, but in his heart, Jack knew they had carried a part of him with them. They had left their mark on him in ways he couldn't put into words. One morning, several weeks after the chief had left, Jack was walking along the edge of the creek when he heard the unmistakable sound of hooves approaching. He stopped in his tracks, his heart beating faster. For a moment, he thought it might be Chief Nakai again, coming to visit, or maybe to bring news of the girls. But as the figure drew closer, Jack's breath caught in his throat. It wasn't the chief. It was someone else. A lone rider on horseback, moving slowly but steadily, was approaching the ranch. Jack didn't recognize him at first, but the man rode with a sense of purpose, his posture straight and sure. As the rider came closer, Jack's instincts told him it was someone important, someone with a reason to be here. The man wore a wide-brimmed hat and a long coat that billowed slightly in the wind. His eyes were hidden beneath the shadow of his hat, but there was something familiar in the way he moved. Jack stepped forward, trying to get a better look. As the man pulled up to the ranch, Jack could see that he was older, his face weathered by years of experience, and perhaps the weight of many miles. There was a quiet strength in the way he carried himself, a confidence that suggested he had seen much and had lived to tell the tale. The rider dismounted, and for the first time, Jack noticed the distinctive markings on the horse's saddle, symbols that were unmistakable. Apache. The rider walked toward Jack, his eyes calm but assessing. There was no hint of aggression in his movements, but Jack could sense that this man was not here for a casual visit. "I'm looking for a man named Jack Williams," the rider said, his voice low and steady. Jack nodded, surprised by the familiarity of the name. "That's me," he said, his voice betraying a slight hint of curiosity. The man paused, his gaze narrowing slightly as he looked Jack over. "I've come to speak with you on behalf of Chief Nakai," he said. "The chief wanted you to know that Taya and Zita are safe, and they are well cared for. The tribe is grateful for what you did." Jack felt a sense of relief wash over him. He hadn't known what to expect when the chief left, but hearing that the girls were well brought a deep sense of peace. It was clear that they were being cared for, that they had found a place where they belonged. Jack had done what he could, but it had always been a temporary solution. They needed their people, their home. "I'm glad to hear that," Jack replied, his voice sincere. "I did what I could for them, but they're the ones who showed the most strength." The man smiled, a small, knowing smile. "Yes, they are strong. But so are you, Jack Williams. The chief appreciates what you did." Not many would have taken that risk. Jack felt his cheeks flush slightly at the compliment, but he wasn't one to accept praise easily. "I just did what I thought was right. Nothing more." The rider nodded, then reached into his coat and pulled out a small package. He handed it to Jack, who took it carefully. It was wrapped in cloth, and there was a weight to it that felt familiar. Jack unwrapped the cloth slowly, revealing a small carved box. The carvings were intricate, beautiful, and unmistakably Apache. The box was a work of art, each symbol telling a story Jack could only imagine. "This is a gift from the tribe," the rider said, "a token of gratitude. Chief Nakai wanted you to have it." Jack ran his fingers over the smooth surface of the box. He didn't need to say anything. He knew what it meant. It was another gesture of respect, a reminder of the connection between him and the people he had helped. It wasn't something he had expected, but now that it was in his hands, he realized how much it meant to him. It was a part of their world, a piece of their culture, and now it was part of his. "Tell Chief Nakai I'm grateful," Jack said quietly, his voice full of meaning. The rider gave a slight nod. "I will." With that, the man turned and mounted his horse once more. He didn't say anything else, but Jack could see the quiet respect in his eyes as he rode off into the distance. Jack watched him go, the weight of the gift in his hands, and the knowledge that he had been part of something much bigger than himself. As the rider disappeared over the horizon, Jack stood there for a long moment, holding the carved box. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the land, and as Jack looked out over the land, he finally understood that the impact of his actions had rippled out farther than he could ever have imagined. His life had crossed paths with Taya and Zeta, with Chief Nakai, and with the Apache people. And that, Jack realized, was a connection that would last forever.